Good.
Go. Okay, welcome everybody to Contemporary Issues. We are talking today about the Justice Department and the politicization of the Justice Department with the James Comey book, and Ron's going to present to us. So thanks for being here. Our usual announcements, please mute yourself in the lower left corner
I
of
also
your
had to drink. I can't. Yeah.
Oh, you can't?
This is as loud as.
Oh,
I will do that too as necessary here, and we are recording this today for future playback. And nice to have everybody here. Today was the first live in-person service at St. Andrew. Vicki and I went, enjoyed it. A couple hundred people there. It was nice, low-key service, but so nice to be back in the building and see lots of people. Hope we can see you all there soon. Any other announcements before we get started? Okay, Ron, thanks for this book review.
Okay. James Comey has written 2 books since the election of 2016. His first one was the one on the right, A Higher Loyalty. And then the one he's come out with just in the last 6 months is the one on the left, Saving Justice. And notice in the title, the first one had subtitled Truth, Lies, and Leadership. And this one is has subtitled Truth, Transparency, and Trust, issues that have become very important. We're going to reminisce into the past, put up a quote from Robert Kennedy. And I like this quote. Every time we turn our heads the other way, when we see the law flouted, when we tolerate what we know to be wrong, when we close our eyes and ears to the corrupt because we're too busy or too frightened, in other words, afraid or intimidated to speak up, we fail to speak up and speak out, we strike a blow against freedom and decency and justice. He said that back in the early 60s, and oh, how well it applies today. And then encouragement for us all, the bottom quote, few of us will have the greatness to bend history itself. I always think sometimes you feel like when you're working in the political, religious arena, you feel like a little water turtle trying to turn a great ship. But we all have to do what we can do and do our best. And that's what Robert Kennedy encouraged us to do with that second quote there. Okay, jumping back to James Comey. He's got a very good looking family there. He's got, he lost one child just a few days after birth, but he has 5 full adult children now. He's a very tall man. I think he's like 6'6", but he was born in the 1960s in Yonkers, New York, definitely to a blue-collar family. He grew up in the Bronx area, and then his family moved across the river to a little better neighborhood of New York. His great-grandparents were part Irish, came as part of the Irish immigrant wave of the late 1880s. His grandfather had to drop out of school in 6th grade to support the family after the father was killed in an industrial accident. Later became a police officer. So he's got a little bit of police officer in his family heritage. He also said growing up, he experienced some bullying when he moved from the inner New York Bronx neighborhood over to the Brookside Elementary on the other side of the river that did not have that Bronx accent. Okay, as Comey became director of the FBI, he said here were the points, the thing he was trying to stress and what he considered what should be the desired attributes to lead the FBI. He wanted integrity, decency, confidence enough to be humble, be both kind and tough, be transparent, be aware that we all seek meaning in our work, and to say what is important, but what you do is more important than what you say. He also stressed you need to have the ability to orbit a problem, like a satellite going around a a Martian moon or Mars itself, and see through the eyes of people very different from you. So many people are blind in this area. They can only see things through their rose-colored or other colored glasses. They can't see the other person's perspective. He also stressed the employees of the FBI, they needed to fight for balance in their lives. He didn't want people burning the midnight oil at their desk till 9 o'clock every night before they went home. He told them they needed to take care of their families and their relationships. And then, of course, right now, the director of the FBI is Christopher Wray. Okay, let's move on here. Impressions of Obama by Comey. He said his first meeting with Obama, he was struck by how thin he appeared, but also his ability to focus. He said Obama really focused. And he said, I was struck by the way he could see and evaluate from a variety of angles on a complicated issue. In other words, Obama did not suffer from tunnel vision, where he could see things from different viewpoints. And he said, during the interview, Obama said to him, I don't want help from the FBI on policy. I need competence, and he stressed independence. Obama said he did not want the Justice Department and the FBI to become a political tool. And Comey indicated his political independence worked in his favor and expressed to Obama his feelings that the FBI should be independent and totally divorced from politics. So Comey has had Republican leanings. He has now slid the other direction after his experience with Trump. But he certainly was not a hard right or hard left person, Comey that is. Okay, some of you probably remember this picture that was on the news some 4 years ago, January 27 of 2017. It was a reception at the White House, and I quote the song, "Hold me, thrill me, kiss me, never let me go." Comey successfully kind of shrugged off a hug that Trump was trying to give him on TV, but still Trump put his mouth pretty close to his ear, and it ended up looking to it like a kiss to some on TV. And of course, Comey did not want that. To quote Comey, the head of the FBI should not be put in a position of meeting and chatting privately with the president. In other words, Comey felt it was okay to meet the president, introduce himself, but they should not be buddies and talking and picking up the phone and calling each other. The FBI needs to be independent of political influence. And Comey's fear was that Trump was trying to bring the FBI under his wing and use it as a political tool. And here's a cartoon, comes down on Trump pretty hard. I want your loyalty, I need your loyalty, I demand your loyalty. You can see what the dog's thinking. Comey told Trump he was kind of forced into a private meeting with him at a dinner. And Trump, a couple times in the conversation, said, I need loyalty and I expect loyalty. And he answered back that, no, I'll give you truth, but I'm not going to give you, I can't promise blind loyalty. And he said in his first book, I remember thinking at that moment when Trump was asking for his loyalty, that the president doesn't understand the FBI's role in American life or care about what has happened in the last 40 years. And we continued our encounter. And Comey said this was not a conversation, it was an encounter. Conversation doesn't apply when one person speaks nearly all the time. So Trump had a way of lionizing and taking over the conversation and turning it into a one-way transmitter affair and not a conversation. He did say Trump rattled on at that dinner, going through the accusations women had made about him one by one. Okay. So at that dinner, also, Comey said he noticed that Trump rarely laughs, not in small talk, not in a relaxed dinner, and he thinks that maybe Trump's rooted in deep insecurity and inability to be vulnerable or risk himself. And Trump kept returning to the issue of loyalty in that dinner again and again. Comey paused and finally said to him, "You will always get honesty from me." And Comey said, "Ethical leaders never ask for loyalty. Those leading through fear, like the Cosa Nostra, require personal loyalty. So no organization or person should ask you for blind loyalty." Okay. Looking at the United States, we have what we call district courts. This shows the 10 district courts. There might be another one not shown on here, but I think this has got them all that you hear in the United States. So the different color boundaries, there's 11 of them, I stand correct. But the different color codings stand for the different geographic boundaries of district court. Colorado falls in a U.S. district court that incorporates Wyoming, Utah, Kansas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. So we hear a lot of an issue being decided in a certain district court and sometimes being flipped up to an appeal to the next court level, which is the Supreme Court. Okay.
Ron,
Here's a piece of news that hit in March
Ron?
of this year. Yeah, go ahead.
could I ask a question? And
Sure.
maybe anybody else at this point, just about the independence of the FBI and the Justice Department. Is it correct that they have to be independent because they often investigate people who are working for the president's associates, things like that? And since they do that, why are those two departments under the president and not separate from the federal government?
They have never been. If you look at what government organizations fall under the different branches of government, there's virtually nothing under the Supreme Court. There's quite very little under the auspices of Congress. Almost every federal department falls under the auspices of the presidency. So the president has tremendous capability to influence energy, justice, economics, every department you can think of. And if you look at the sheer number of employees that fall under the executive branch, it overwhelms, it's like 90-something%. There's virtually nothing. It's very, very little in the federal government is truly independent.
I don't know if it's even possible for it to be separated from under the president's power, but it just seems like logically it ought to be separated from being under his authority.
Under most presidencies in the last 100 years, there's kind of been a gentleman's agreement, shall we call, or gentlelady's agreement, that you should keep your hands off the Justice Department and the FBI, that you keep a good arm's distance from them. There's also somewhat of an agreement that you shouldn't get too deeply involved controlling the Department of Defense, that you need to let the Air Force handle the Air Force and the Army handle the Army. Although there's more political involvement there, but that's the way it is.
Okay, thank you.
In March of this year, attorneys in the Justice Department filed a motion in U.S. District Court in Virginia to order the Republican governor of West Virginia to pay a fine and complete remediation at some mine sites. And Jim Justice is the governor of West Virginia. And he was being allowed to ignore consent decrees and agreement that the government had made with him to clean up his act on several of his mines, and was ignoring him. And finally, the Justice Department decided to go after him and say, look, you've got to come up to your agreements with your Southern Coal Company and start following the agreements. So here's a case where it shows where the Justice Department does need to stay non-political and unfortunately, the Trump administration did not take any action to keep the governor of West Virginia from basically ignoring federal regulations. Okay, one of my favorite movies, a little humor here. I don't know if anybody in the class saw Smokey and the Bandit, a classic from the 70s, but I love that quote by Sheriff Buford T. Justice, played by Jackie Gleason. Said, what we have here is a total lack of respect for the law. So the law needs to be, and the Justice Department needs to be non-politicized. Okay, in Comey's book, if you read the book, he's got a lot of good stories in it, talking about people that went under the Witness Protection Program, about his extensive dealings with mobsters, very murderous mobsters in many cases, also dealing with some crimes that the FBI took care of, like a furrier in New York City that claimed that one morning he was tied up and bad guys came in and stole all his furs, a truckload of them, but it was really a fake. And so there's some really excellent stories in his second book. But I'm focusing on the part where he deals with the federal level and areas of the Justice Department. Areas where the FBI has fallen short in the past, and these come out in Comey's book. J. Edgar Hoover had FBI surveillance put on Dr. Martin Luther King and some student organizations. In fact, Hoover said he labeled Martin Luther King the most dangerous Negro in the future of this nation. He ordered around-the-clock surveillance on King, hoping to find some evidence of communism or sexual deviance. He also said another failure the FBI had in its past was they overcommitted to the accuracy of hair samples. If they find your hair sample at a crime scene, the DNA can link it perfectly and accurately, 100% confidently. But prior to the DNA days, hair is a good indicator. It probably narrows down the population that can match that hair to a group of just a couple percent, but it's not totally perfect like DNA is. And he said the FBI had overcommitted confidence level to some hair matching they found at some crime scenes. And so Comey said they had to go back under his direction and reevaluate some of the cases where the conviction was finalized because of a hair sample match. Comey also said as he got into the office, he realized more and more that the FBI needed to have a higher percentage of women, non-whites, and be better representative of the population. Police forces and the FBI have had some difficulty getting a match in their personnel that more matched the population distribution of the country. So law enforcement is trying to make moves in that direction, including the FBI. Okay. Well, where were some of the worst abuses of this gentleman's agreement that the president should stay apart from the Justice Department? Probably the worst case in our lifetime, other than the Trump discretions, were the Nixon White House. 11 days after the Watergate break-in, White House counsel John Dean brought Nixon appointed acting FBI director Louis Patrick Gray a package of documents explaining they came from the White House safe and asked the FBI director to get rid of them. So no matter what business you're in, if somebody comes to you with official documents and says to you, hide these or destroy these, alarm bells ought to go off all over the place. And the FBI director at that time blindly followed the command and burned these documents that came from the Nixon White House in his fireplace. Certainly a case of obstruction and destruction of evidence. Gray later shared the FBI files on the Watergate investigation with the White House. So here's another case where Gray let the White House see some of the White House or FBI files, which they should not have done. So Nixon tried to use the FBI and the CIA to shut down the Watergate investigation. So that was one of the worst and most flagrant abuses of the FBI, CIA in presidential history. And when the FBI and CIA didn't shut down the Watergate investigation, Nixon moved to fire the special prosecutor investigating him, leading to what they called the Saturday Night Massacre, when the Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General both refused to carry out Nixon's order. So this was maybe the worst, or one of the two worst crises we've had in presidential interference with the Justice Department and the FBI. This next slide just shows the history of who's been in the office. And of course, we have Merrick Garland right now, who is thought of, I think, across the board very highly. His predecessor, though, of course, was William Barr, who got into hot water, and Jeff Sessions, both of whom ended up crossing with Trump. And here's some of the other prior holders of that office. All right. There was a book written in the 70s called Restoring Justice. Gerald Ford, after the Nixon crisis and after Nixon resigned, asked Edward Levy, who was president of the University of Chicago, to serve as Attorney General and save the Justice Department from this Nixon interference. And Levi is credited with cleaning up the mess in his 2-year tenure, restoring the morale. And upon stepping aside as a Carter when he took office, he said, "We have shown that the administration of justice can be fair, effective, and not nonpartisan." So there's a good book. And of course, it's reaching back in history a ways now to the time of the Nixon administration. Okay. Trump, of course, initially coming out of the gate in 2016, appointed William Sessions of Alabama as the Attorney General. But almost immediately, he started crossing Trump. Sessions refused to play a part in some of the investigations. He said, "I had worked on the re-election and the election a bit," and he excused himself from the investigation. Sessions, of course, did recuse himself from the Russia probe, saying, "I don't belong directing a probe that I had potentially some connections to." And Trump took his frustrations to Twitter and called Sessions beleaguered and criticized his handling of the Department of Justice. And of course, Trump did fire Sessions for being loyal to his office, not to Trump. And he fired him in November of 2018, right after the midterm elections. So Trump did that firing at what he considered the most opportune time to avoid political repercussions. He waited until the midterms were over. I'm not going to hammer on these next two slides other than to call it the Trump cronies. If you put on a piece of paper all the members of the Trump organization, the committee to elect him for the crimes and what they got caught at, it's a big number. It's not just one or two. It's a handful, 8 more. Steve Bannon, Roger Stone, convicted on 7 criminal counts of obstruction of a congressional investigation, 5 counts of making false statements to Congress. Paul Manafort found guilty of tax fraud and bank fraud in a jury trial. So it wasn't just purely political crimes these guys were convicted of. They were evading taxes, bank fraud, lying to Congress, money laundering, all kinds of stuff. Michael Cohen, of course, has flipped, and he's written a book that I consider almost must reading for Americans to get a good view of our former president. Some of the other cronies: Michael Flynn, Rick Gates, George Nader, George Papadopoulos, and again, these guys were involved in all kinds of crimes, some before Trump even took office. So let's face it, the guy brought in a real batch of bad people who were convicted in courts all over the land. I've titled this slide, "Won't Pledge Blind Loyalty, Fire Them." Trump said in May 9th of 2017 that he fired Comey after he received a recommendation from the Department of Justice. Then he said he decided to fire Comey before he got the Department of Justice recommendation. Then he said the investigation had nothing to do with the firing. He was fired because he had lost support among the rank and file. Let's call the truth the truth. He fired him because he didn't like, he wasn't being a, quote, suck up to what he wanted him to do. He fired him for speaking the truth and standing up for what he believed in. All right, the Russia probe. Catch Me If You Can. If you haven't watched that movie, Catch Me If You Can, I recommend it. The book is even better. Trump told the Russians in the Oval Office that firing nut job Comey eased great pressure from the probe. So he wanted to get rid of Comey because Comey would not cover up for him. Trump continued his assault on the Justice Department. Unfortunately, when Barr first came into office, he saw the presidency as an imperial presidency, stating that the Constitution endows the president with nearly autocratic powers, total authority over the Justice Department, and a right to order and end investigations. And that's really scary. And he insisted that the Congress and courts encroached on the president's autonomy. And we've seen articles that in the last decade and a half, the presidency has gotten more imperial and has gotten more powerful relative to the legislative branch of government. All right. So Barr went in action. Barr sanitized and distorted the personal summary of the Mueller investigation and released his viewpoint of it before it was officially released. He watered down the sentencing recommendation for Roger Stone, and Barr's intervention on these things led to 4 federal prosecutors resigning the case, one leaving the Department of Justice entirely. And he intervened to encourage dropping a case to which an ally of the president, that is Michael Flynn, had already pled guilty twice. So Barr did follow Trump's directives, became one of his cronies, and corrupted the Justice Department. But finally, even Barr couldn't take it. But before Barr resigned, in February of 2020, more than 2,000 former Department of Justice officials of both parties called on him to resign, noting he had flouted the obligation for equal justice and not acted like a Department of Justice leader should. So Barr gets bad grades by just about everybody except Trump for what he had done. But then finally, in December of this last year, even Barr had enough. After the big lie proclamation by Trump about the election fraud, Barr told ABC News that the president's tweets make it impossible for me to do my jobs. Tensions flared, and some bad exchanges between even Barr and Trump. And finally, in December of 2020, Barr publicly announced and told Trump there was no evidence of significant fraud in the 2020 election. And finally, he submitted his resignation on December 14th. So even Barr, despite all of the bad things he had done, couldn't take it anymore and left just before the turnover of power. Okay, we're going to jump to our new Attorney General, Merrick Garland. He was confirmed on March 10th, and he promised to prioritize combating extremist violence and to do a thorough investigation of the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. And Garland, it's agreed, has a good bit of cleaning up to do. On the plus side, he's getting high marks from just about every source, claiming he is doing that. He's doing a good job. And some of the focuses that Merrick Garland has are to improve morale and restore the traditional barriers of the Justice Department and the White House.
Ron,
Yeah, go ahead.
what do you know what the vote was in the Senate for his appointment?
Significant. It wasn't unanimous, but it was a very dominant majority.
Thank you.
So Merrick Garland's got quite a bit of work to do. Again, note this little note in the corner. More than 1,100 past Justice Department employees signed a petition demanding Bill Barr quit over his handling of the Roger Stone case. So Garland's done a lot of things in his past. He played a key role in looking at domestic terrorism. Particularly, he focused on the investigation of the Oklahoma City bomber for that terrible bombing of the Justice or Federal building in Oklahoma. And again, he's opening some investigations. He wants to look at the Louisville and the Minneapolis police departments. He issued a hate crimes indictment against the 3 Georgia men who basically shot Ahmaud Arbery, the guy who was jogging through that neighborhood. And he initiated prosecution against a Louisiana police officer and a West Virginia police officer for unreasonable force. So Garland is taking actions to quell police excesses, investigate departments need closer looking at it. Also, he expanded the indictments against the men who plotted to kidnap and maybe even kill Gretchen Whitmer. The 6 men charged, and here's a poster of many of the people involved in that plot against the Michigan governor, Gretchen. 6 men face kidnapping conspiracy charges because they collected thousands of rounds of ammunition, and all kinds of explosives and artillery shells to do bad things in the state of Michigan, particularly against Governor Gretchen Whitmer. And suspects were tied to a paramilitary militia group called themselves the Wolverine Watchmen. There's a mugshots of those guys. Also, Merrick Garland did, without political interference, has allowed further investigation of Rudy Giuliani to go on. And Merrick Garland is not getting personal communication from the president Biden. He's acting on his own accord. All right. I want to make a quick mention of what you've heard the term Jim Crow. We want to note that the Jim Crow was, the term came from a white entertainer, Tom Rice, who performed a song and dance act supposedly modeled after a slave. He called the character Jim Crow. So that's where the phrase Jim Crow laws come from. And after the American Civil War, most of the southern states and border states passed laws that have subsequently been called Jim Crow laws that have kind of become shorthand for segregating and persecuting African Americans in the 1870s to the 1960s. And we also want to mention from a previous lesson, the Department of Justice right now is kind of operating with one hand behind its back without the pre-clearance provision of the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act had been in effect for at least 2 decades. And it was, as we say, neutered in 2013 when the Congress did not renew it. It had been renewed at various times from 1965 all the way up to 2006 with bipartisan support. But the Voting Rights Act Section 5 pre-clearance mechanism prevented at least 86 attempts to subvert voting rights between 98 and 2013. And that has been struck down. And the second the Supreme Court struck that down, as we mentioned a few weeks ago, Texas announced that it would bite down on its voter disenfranchisement, as soon as that Voting Rights Act was discontinued. So the Justice Department is under a significant handicap. Okay, domestic terrorism. There's unfortunately been a surge in domestic terrorism, and it's color-coded here. The orange is right-wing extremist attacks and plots, and the only reason the 2021 number is low is because this data was taken very early this year. You can see where the last 5 years has seen a significant rise in domestic terrorism. And looking at the numbers, since 2015, right-wing extremists have been involved in 267 attacks and 91 fatalities. The left, 66 incidents leading to 19 deaths. So there's a huge disparity in domestic terrorism. It is coming from the right by an overwhelming majority. Okay. Garland has some politically sensitive cases in front of him. We'll see if he does anything regarding the investigation of Hunter Biden for possible tax crimes. And that investigation should continue unabated and be done fairly and effectively without presidential interference. Also, Special Counsel John Durham is doing an investigation into the FBI's probe of the Trump political campaign. So there's every reason to believe Garland's not going to try to politically interfere with those 2 cases. Jumping back in our last couple slides, Comey's principles. Comey stresses in his book again and again, the Department of Justice is built on the notion that the federal prosecutors represent an idea, justice, not just an ordinary client. And the Attorney General has a responsibility to others other than the President. He's the legal officer of the United States. And he said the whole truth must be at the center of our justice system. And again, these are the precepts that Merrick Garland has openly expressed to the Congress. He said we must ensure laws are fairly and faithfully enforced, and reaffirming adherence to policies to protect political independence, with the Attorney General acting as a lawyer for the American people, not the President. So I've yacked enough. Let's open it up for some questions, and I'll take it off of sharing here.
Did he have any comments about Robert Mueller's investigation in his book?
Yes, he basically said that the Mueller investigation was valid and good, but the bad thing was that there was obstruction of justice, multiple instances of obstruction of justice by the president at that time, Trump.
He wasn't.
Any other
Ron,
questions? Yeah, go ahead.
sure. Do you think most Americans understand about the independence issue? Why it's important for those departments to be independent?
I think they do, but they're not as willing to speak up or take action as they should be.
Mhm.
There was an article I cut out of the Denver paper where the prosecutor for our judicial district, George Brockler, wrote an editorial in the Denver Post, and he said he said at our level, it's critically important that we not have political interference at the state and local level with the various district attorneys. They needed to be apolitical and enforce justice without regard for political viewpoints or perspectives. So even Brockler came down with a very powerful editorial on that.
Maybe there should be four government.
Ron, in his book, did he happen to mention anything in the weeks, months before the 2016 election where he came out and made some sort of comments, I don't remember what they were anymore, about Hillary Clinton, while at the same time, Trump was also under investigation, but that was never mentioned? Did he comment on that at all?
Heavily. In fact, his first book, not the current one, Saving Justice, but his first book has several chapters on the agony he went through, citing how to handle the Hillary Clinton investigation. Not so much he was determined right away to do a full investigation of it. Where he had struggles were the report and the timing of those reports. His wife, for example, and daughters were not at all happy with his public announcement, just a couple of weeks before the election, that there had been some new evidence uncovered about the Hillary Clinton emails that he needed to look at. He goes, there's a couple chapters on the agony he went through. It was kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of position. So yeah, the book has quite a bit on, his first book has a great deal on that issue.
I can appreciate his agony on that. But if he knew there were two investigations going on, one for one candidate, one for another candidate, did he ever comment why he didn't communicate both of those?
I think he said that you got to remember the election of 2016, the incidents leading to that were just in their early stages when the election happened, and the vast majority of the investigative material didn't on what Trump had been doing with the Russians didn't come out till many months after the election. So there wasn't much there on the Trump investigation during the time of the 2016 election.
Hey, Ron,
Yes.
are the district attorneys, is that who I mean? The district attorneys, are they politically appointed?
No, you vote for, at the local level, your district attorney.
Okay, so I guess I'm wondering, how can it be separated? How can you separate?
Well, we're thinking national level now. We
Okay.
we vote
But
for our local district attorney. We
Okay.
don't vote for the presidential appointment of the attorney general.
Oh, so the president
Federal level.
appoints the,
President appoints at the federal level.
okay,
The
okay.
Department of Justice.
But he typically would appoint someone that would be his political bent, right?
Yes, but again, there's kind of an agreement that is transitioned across most administrations that you pick somebody that is pretty independent. Isn't going
I
to be
just
your.
think it doesn't make much sense to think that you can separate that politically when they're politically motivated to probably pick somebody that's going to do what it doesn't make sense to me. Does that make sense?
Actually, if you got a good, honest president,
Yeah.
there shouldn't be a whole lot of cases that come up that are super political.
Yeah.
In fact, if you look at the majority of presidents, from Eisenhower on up.
And any legal professional professes, although not in practice, to follow the law, follow the rule of law, and not a political bent.
Right.
So
Right.
even though they may have personal thoughts in their execution of justice, they should be impartial.
Right. Right. But how can you guarantee that?
You can't.
Like the Supreme Court appoint justices that are appointed. President hopes they'll rule in his
Favor on issues, but they're pledged to be independent. Yeah.
So I have a follow-up question. Does the administration appoint the state attorney generals? Or how does that happen? Because it seemed like the administrations change, the state attorney generals often change.
State attorney generals are voted for. Phil Weiser is the current Colorado attorney general, and he was elected by the people of Colorado and Colorado only.
Did you read anything about why, maybe more detail, Comey doesn't believe that Trump be prosecuted, they should go after Trump, no matter what the evidence is amassed against him, and no matter how compelling, let's say, the roadmap is? Why does any more information on why Comey believes that? Did he read any details? And I mean, how could he say that? I wonder.
He doesn't go into that in his latest book, but you're right. I have heard him say on interviews that he felt that we needed to look more into the future and not so much as to in the past to go back and and nail Trump.
Interesting.
Although I think Trump still got some serious issues to face relative to state level charges, like in New York.
Right.
And Ron, concerning that, would you comment, please, on what you think will happen from those charges in New York? Just, you know, whatever your thoughts are, big from your readings and your perspective. And if there is any chance that those charges can prevent him from running again.
I don't know what the rules are on a state level conviction to prevent you from running for office. You may need federal charges. I have to get educated on that. In terms of what's going to happen, I know Michael Cohen is talked many times now to the New York investigators. I think we will hear of some charges that come out of the New York investigation, just by what I'm hearing on the news of the people that are talking to law enforcement.
Yeah, his CFO flip.
Yeah, I think there's concern on Trump's part whether some folks in his own organization, even including some of his, you know, family and relations, might spill the beans on some stuff.
Or he might flip on them.
Flip on that, yeah. Grab the last life jacket and jump off the boat.
Well, does Biden take his information and his direction from someone else?
I'm not sure I understand.
Does Biden do whatever he's told to do?
I'm unaware of Biden not being his own person. I think he makes
Really?
I think he makes his own decision. He gives advice, but I don't think he's a puppet of any person.
You don't think so, huh?
I don't think so. No, I think he's his own.
He
his own
appears to
man.
be a puppet, pretty much, to me, and a lot of people I talk to say that. I don't know.
He listens to his cabinet, from what I understand.
He doesn't talk much at all to the public.
He
You know, when
doesn't
people
tweet
try
every-
to ask him a question, he usually very often just doesn't answer.
He doesn't tweet every morning.
He doesn't talk to groups. He gets off the airplane and he doesn't talk to them. He walks on by.
Yeah, a lot of us think he's pretty carefully managed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, could I ask Toby, if you mind, if I ask you as an attorney, what you think about this whole issue and about Comey? Toby, would you be comfortable sharing your opinion?
About Comey?
Yeah,
Yeah,
what do you think about Comey?
Well, I think Comey is aware that he made a big mistake of talking about Hillary. And like Ron says, he agonized in his book before he did. Turns out he should have kept his mouth shut, but hindsight is a beautiful tool. I think that his comments about you have to be honest, you can't be afraid to speak up. You look back at what happened to people who spoke up in the McCarthy era, they lost their jobs. So I think fear is a realistic thing that we have to deal with. You can't just say you can't be afraid, you can't have it. You know,
Thank you, Toby.
Yeah.
This is Terry. I can remember when Hoover was the FBI, and he kept records on anybody, including the Kennedys, and he kept them in line. And even today, the FBI has records on everybody, and probably including yourselves. And there's always more there than you don't want to open the can of worms. So they know a lot more than you can believe they know. And so you don't want to always open that can of worms.
Including Siri. I think Siri knows a lot more about us too. read anything in that book about why there was such a push about the Clinton private email server, when it's a fact that Pence used a private email server when he was the governor of Indiana, and it actually was hacked last year. So it's and even some of the it seems like hypocritical. Why such a push when the investigation didn't reveal anything that happened? So I found that interesting fact. I'm not trying to say one is privy over the other, but when one is doing the same thing the other one is, and it's swept under the rug, but then they take this other person and just try to ream them. Any insights from reading that Comey book on why there was such the Clinton emails?
Well, having worked in the defense industry with a clearance, we were always taught from day one that you did not discuss or release any kind of confidential material in non-secure computer systems or emails. And she, of course, wasn't working on direct defense technology projects, but she was dealing with negotiations with foreign countries. And she did not follow the strict rules of keeping, she dealt with some business on her private email server that should not have been. How much damage did it do? I'm not sure. But she should not have done that. Now, how badly? Comey did say that no one in the Justice Department felt like her transgression constituted a felony or something that needed to be, it was carelessness, dumb carelessness.
But I guess my question was, Pence did the same thing.
So did members of Trump's family. Jared had a private server. And,
That's what I'm getting at. Yeah, they were doing the same thing, and it just got swept under the rug. And I don't think it's fair. I think
Fair is fair.
Fair. The rule of law is the rule of law. I mean, you know what I mean. You're right. What she was doing was wrong, but so was Pence and all other people from the other party. But I'm not trying to pick on one party or the other. I'm just saying it's the rule of law. Should be equal across the board. But I know what you're saying. Yeah. Thanks.
All righty.
Well, thank you, Ron. Another good presentation. Any final questions for Ron or comments?
It was great, Ron. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for putting all the time and effort into this. You always do a great job.
Yes.
Very
Good job,
Ron.
We really
Okay,
appreciate it.
very good. Thank you, Ron. Thanks for hanging in there with the technology problems at the beginning here. We made it work.
Yeah.
We were at the first service today, and you guys should know that they're going down a really cool. I think the hybrid services are going to be good. They're going to be cool. So something to look for.
Yeah. Okay, next week our guest speaker is going to be Reverend Lauren Boyd, the pastor of small groups. So let's ask her what is going on with small groups at St. Andrew. And I've got a lot of questions too about groups today, Christian small groups and singles groups and all that kind of thing. How are they to operate today in churches? I think it's an issue that we can explore. Okay, thanks everybody. Take care. We'll see you next week.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Ron. Bye.
Thanks, Ron. Bye-bye.
Hey, Steve, what's Wednesday look like for hiking? Do you know yet?
Yeah, I sent you a couple emails, Ron. Maybe my emails are not getting through. I am good for hiking, except I have to take Vicky to the airport at 7 in the morning, so I could be at your house about 8.
On Wednesday?
On Wednesday, if
Wednesday,
that still
okay.
works.
Yeah, I think, that'd work.
Okay.
Wednesday's by far the best day for Doug.
Yes. Yes. So that's good. If that works for you, that's as
Okay.
soon as I can get there.
Okay,
Okay. I'll talk to you before then.
okay.
Take care. See ya.
Right.
Bye.